Welcome to Serenity is Addictive, where we explore the benefits of 12-step spirituality in depth. Let's get ready to dive in deep into this next episode. Welcome to Step 3. We've already done an introduction and a brief history. We've done Step 1. We've done Step 2. And tonight's episode is Step 3. We are excited to dig in and continue our journey. And as I've mentioned several times, each of these steps build off one another. And so they go together. And a quick summary of Step 1, Step 2, Step 3. Step 1, I can't. Cut off from a higher power, left to myself. I can't. Step 2, my higher power can, or God can. Step 3, I will let him. Powerful. That's where we're at today. Step 3, I will let him. I will let God, or I will let my higher power do the work. Which is interesting to think about, Catalina, because it's, to me, reading that I will let him means that this higher power wants to help me. It gives me a clue that he wants to help me intimately. And why don't I read the step? Step 3 says, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. I remember talking to a therapist a while back, and he said, what's the most important word? Or what's the most important thing about Step 3? And at that time, I said, I don't know, turning everything over to God? And he said, no, the word care. You're not just turning things over to any God or any higher power. This higher power or God cares for you. Beautiful, you know?
I actually have never thought of this before, but really, it should be, I can't, God can. I've made a decision to let him. Because this isn't really the step where you say, I've now surrendered every part of my life for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. This is the step where you say, it's almost like a philosophical belief change where you're saying, I, at this point, have understood that I have things that I am powerless over. And so I'm going to turn those now over to a higher power, someone more powerful than myself, because my best thinking got me to where I am today, which obviously isn't, having a place where all of our problems are solved. So I think, honestly, I've never even thought about that before, because I've always liked that I can't, God can. I'll let him. But really, it's I've decided to let him.
Right. No, that's a great point, and I love how you bring up something that's so important. Is we're making a decision here, and one of the books from Al-Anon called Paths to Recovery, Al-Anon Steps, Traditions, and Concepts, they talk about this little story to illustrate Step 3. They say a member posed the following. So 3 frogs sat on a lily pad. One made a decision to jump off. How many frogs are left? The answer is 3. The frog merely made the decision to jump. He hasn't jumped yet. So, Catalina, I think you're absolutely right, at least in my own experience as well, that this is just making a decision. But that decision in and of itself can be very powerful and relieving, because from a lifetime of running the show myself and running by self-will or self-propulsion, or giving in to my fears, my anxieties, my insecurities, and trying to control everything, just making the decision that hasn't been followed up on action yet, right, is a relief, and sometimes just takes a lot of weight off your shoulders. But as we said with the frog story, if you don't actually follow up the decision with actions to actually practice the art of turning things over to the higher power so you can let him resolve things, you're not going to make much progress. There's an old saying in AA circles that said, what's the most important thing you need to know about God or a higher power? And they say the answer to that is that you're not him. That you're not the higher power, or you're not God. That's the most important thing. And there's a lot of truth to that, because I think Catalina and I spoke a little bit about this in Step 1 and Step 2. where I had a faith tradition and I'm saying all these prayers and I'm doing all these things, but I was playing God. I was telling God what to do. It was almost like I was picking up a playbook and saying, this is what needs to be done, God. Do this, do that. Be my errand boy. Make this happen. And if you do, I'll be happy. And if you don't, I'm going to be mad. Just that insanity, we're letting go of that insanity. Catalina, you have something to say, I can tell.
Well, I definitely think that, we're getting into an area of beliefs where I think that it's kind of this sneaky belief system where you think prayer and religious ritual is about making God do what you want him to do. It's a formula. If I do X and I don't do Y, then that will equal Z. If I say my prayers faithfully every day and I don't gossip, that means God will give me this promotion, or that means I won't get cancer, or that, things like that. And I think there's a phrase for it, but it's basically like the prosperity prophecy, I believe, or prosperity gospel. It's basically this understanding of, if you're a good person, you're not going to suffer from these things. And it's funny because there's actually an example of that, if you've ever read the Bible, to our listeners out there, or read this section, there's a place in it where there's a blind man, and it was really this whole idea of sins, punishment for sins and wrongdoings, and even through relatives. And so they had a blind man that they brought to Jesus, and they said, hey, this guy's blind, so who sinned? Was it his parents or was it him? Because obviously somebody sinned, because that's why he's suffering. And so it also gives them an excuse to ignore him and treat him poorly, because he's a sinner and he's just suffering for his sins. And Jesus actually says neither. And so I think that there's definitely a lot of places out there that preach the prosperity gospel, and I think that that's a whole nother podcast, but I think it's a dangerous place to go, because good things happen to good people and to, if you want to say, bad people, even though I don't necessarily think there are bad people who do wrong things. And there are bad things that happen to good people and people who do wrong things. And so nobody's immune from good things happening in this life, and nobody's immune from bad things. But I was going to go back to step 3, and my experience with it was actually different than yours. You said you felt a lot of relief just from this decision of turning things over to God. I did not. I was very anxious, and it was similar to if you're standing like on a cliff with a huge ravine between you and this other, I don't know, like area of ground, like a big ravine. I think of like an Indiana Jones scene where there's like a huge raging river between, one area of land and another area of land, and there's this rickety bridge in between, and you look at it and you see the crocodiles underneath you, you see the wind blowing the rickety bridge all over the place, you see the rot on the actual wood that you're supposed to step on, you see the rope that's supposed to be holding the bridge up looking very frail and used. And I've basically just made a decision that I'm going to walk on this bridge. And so there's anxiety and there's fear and there's a lot of uncertainty of like, I know I can't control this, but how comfortable am I with giving this to a higher power? Like, how do I know it's not going to turn out bad or worse than what it turned out with me? And I think that goes back to an understanding of a higher power that is greater than ourselves. It's personal, loving, gentle, to your point, that care piece of it. But you have to believe that higher power has that care. And so I think for me it was, I literally made an agreement with myself, like, okay, surrendering everything for the next rest of my life is too much. Like mentally, I can't deal with that idea. But how much could God screw up in a year? Like, if I give him a year, and at the end of that year, I can see how I feel about things, but I'm going to give him that year. And, maybe it sounds silly to our listeners, but for me, it was a baby step that I could take, right? I couldn't take this big grown-up step no pun intended, since we're talking about the 12 steps, but I couldn't take this grown-up step of, okay, I've made a decision to turn everything over for the rest of my life. It was, okay, I'll turn some things over for the next year, and we'll see how God, I gave God a test run, because I believed in God, but I did not believe in a God that had care that I wanted. So it took time for me to, to do that. And it's okay for anybody who's going through the same stuff. It can be a really hard step to take when there's a lack of trust. Mm-hmm. A lack of trust in the God of your understanding. And even maybe the belief that the God of your understanding is not loving and gentle and personal and cares for you personally. Maybe that, and that was part of it for me too. I had to go through the process of almost reinventing my higher power, or getting to know a new higher power, because my higher power was more of as I grew, I found it was more of a reflection on maybe my like difficult parental influences and fears of what he could be. And maybe even a reflection of my low self-esteem, or my feelings of low self-worth, or all that stuff kind of mixed up. And I believe very firmly now, after many years of walking through this and trying to get to know my higher power better, I realized that the original God that I grew up with I don't think that was that was a very distorted, fun house mirror reflection of what God really is for me. But anyways, I just wanted to mention that, because that was a tough decision for me. I mean, it wasn't that I didn't believe that I couldn't fix things, or that I thought I was all powerful, but this idea that I was going to give it over to, a God that I was afraid of, was scary. I didn't know what he was going to do, I mean, there's just so many ways that your thoughts and fears could take it sideways, that my mind took many of those paths as I was thinking through it and stuff. So it was a process, and it was a slow process for me, and it's still a process, because there are more and more things over time that I felt more and more comfortable with giving to him, my higher power, but it took time. And there's still things to this day that sometimes I have a little bit of a twitch when I think about surrendering over to him, because I'm like, but what if he wants what I don't want? I realize I'm powerless over this, but, we talked about having kids before, and that's actually one of those things for me, that there are moments I feel completely comfortable surrendering that over to God, because I'm powerless to make that happen, or in my time, or at all. And there are other times that I want to surrender it over, and as I'm like going through it in my mind, I think, but what if his will is that we never have kids? And, so it's just an example of that it's not a perfect science. It's an art, and it's something that I think is a little bit unique to every person. And that journey to getting more and more comfortable and really building a trust with your higher power allows you to do it more and more, and surrender more and more to him,
Yeah, no, I love that you bring that up. And, hearing you share your experience makes me think, and I want to make sure I didn't express it this way. I felt when I read those words, there is something relieving about them, but I had so much problems, and I was scared to death too. And, it makes me think of an analogy of saying I want to run a marathon. Just saying I'm going to run the marathon and making the decision to run the marathon doesn't mean much. Now you got to start the process of preparing, and that takes actions, that takes training, that takes daily doing something different than what I used to do, so I can prepare. And it never really ends. And I don't think anybody, and this is in a lot of 12-step literature, there is no one who totally turns every single part of their life over perfectly. Certainly not from day one, or not ever. There's always going to be parts of self that we don't want to turn over, consciously or subconsciously. So I think it's important to remember that. I wanted to say, so we gave the frog analogy, and we talk about the 3 frogs. One made the decision to jump, how many are left on the leaf, and still all 3, because it was just a decision. And, just saying the words, step 3, I made a decision to turn my will in my life, or our will in our lives, over to the care of God as we understood him. It doesn't, there was a sponsor who said, and this comes from a book called The Hunger for Healing on page 53. This sponsee asks his sponsor, if saying the words doesn't turn my will and my life over to God, how do I do it? And the sponsor smiled and said back to the sponsee, that's what steps 4 through 12 are. The way to turn our whole lives, past, future, and present, over to God. And that's really true. You'll hear that a lot more, I find, in my experience in AA circles, but I think they're absolutely right. Step 3, in and of itself, someone says, if you want to know how well you're doing in step 3, take a look at the actions between steps 4 through 12 or steps 4 through 9. Did you do your inventory? Are you identifying what are the areas that are causing blockage from your higher power, from turning your life over to that higher power? In actuality, what's holding that up? And are you asking your higher power to remove those things and help you practice other virtues that are opposite of your shortcomings or things you're having challenges with? That's really important. Catalina, before I go to the big book and read a little bit, anything you want to share on that or any other insights you want to bring up at this time?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much packed into each of these little steps, you read the title and you think, oh, I know what that means, and then you dive in deeper and deeper, and it's interesting because one of the things that, it can be challenging and freeing about this step at the same time is really talking about turning our will and our lives. So basically everything over to a higher power, not just one thing, not just one part of ourselves, everything of just one part, but everything about everything. And I think, back to building trust with a higher power, it's so important because, it's this concept of, I believe that my higher power is interested in every little thing in my life. Why would I be turning every little thing in my life over unless I believed that my higher power wanted to be a part of every little thing, And so there's, it talks about big things, right? Like, I don't know, getting pregnant is one of those for us. Or if you have an addiction, turning that over. But it says, even the small stuff like picking up children from school or faulty appliance work or dealing with traffic, all of these little things that go throughout our day that seem inconsequential to us. And so there's no way that those could even seem important to a higher being that has control over the entire universe. But he actually does. He wants to be a part of every bit of those, every little cell in your body, every hair in your head is important to your higher power, whatever and whoever that is for you. And it's a little bit of it's a lot of a trust building process in understanding that. And there's a phrase, and I don't know if I've mentioned this before in one of our previous podcasts, but there's a phrase regarding 12 steps that's called act as if. And it's basically saying sometimes there are certain things in life where you have to act the behavior and then the right feelings will follow, And so maybe I don't feel like, I don't know, praying, or I don't feel like working out, or I don't feel like, I don't know, putting work into my marriage. But if I do it with the same gusto as if I felt like doing it, after doing it for a little bit and you start to see some benefit from it, those feelings of desiring to do it will come. And I think that this is a really good example of that, of, really sometimes there's no other place to start with this than to take a step out in faith. And what is faith? Faith is not certainty. Faith is actually, faith and certainty are the opposite things. Doubt and faith are actually very similar. Faith is what you do when nothing feels right. Faith is what you do when you've, funny enough, made a decision to do something in spite of the fear and, all the signs, taking that step when you don't see a step there and trusting that there's a step there, even though everything about what you're doing is telling you the opposite. And so I think that this is a perfect example of sometimes you have to just step out in faith because there's nowhere else to start. You wait for the right feeling to be there. You wait to be zapped by lightning and have this perfect understanding of what you need to do. You're going to be waiting a really long time. So sometimes I think that that's where you need to start. And often I think that's in step 3, that's where you need to start, is making that decision. And that's why I think it's so key, because even in addicts, many addicts don't believe what they're saying here, but they're acting as if they're taking that step in faith. And a lot of times it's because they've tried everything else. They've already tried every other channel they could find to get the healing and the serenity that they're looking for, and they can't find it. And so it's kind of like, what do they have to lose type thing, but it still does, it's not the same as feeling this spiritual pull, like I don't know, some spiritual experience. Some do. That's not to say everybody's experience is different, but I think it's much more common that they're like, they understand that they have to step forward in faith with this, even though it feels completely wrong.
Mm-hmm. No, I love that, Catalina. And it's actually beautiful to listen to you share what you said initially, that when you made the decision or you took step 3, you didn't feel that relief by just making that decision. But now look at what you're saying. You can even see the shift from when you explained what went through your mind back then to what you've just said now about this God who wants to care and help you in all your intimate decisions. One thing I had wanted to say when you were sharing your experience of step 3 that I totally forgot and got sidetracked was to emphasize the word experiential. The 12 steps is an experiential spiritual journey, meaning it's not a matter of the intellect alone. That's why even the words, I've seen some people who are quite religious look over these words and go, oh yeah, I do this, even though they're having significant problems in their life. There's one thing to say you have faith, there's one thing to say you're a part of a faith or you're a solid person of faith, but you may not actually be living this, and you may not actually have an experiential experience of this. So like anything else, what's beautiful, Catalina was touching on, you can, like, I like how she said, I'm going to give God permission to do things for a year, and let's see what he can do. He can't screw things up that much. And that tells you where she was at that point. And it also hinted, and she explained in this episode and others, growing up in a home that was very religious and rigorous and very rule-based, and also had some shame there. If you're not perfect, adhere to the rules. That was her conception of God. And so, through trial and error, Catalina, you tell me if I'm wrong, you had to experience giving things over to God incrementally, progressively, not perfectly, and doing the best you can, but then experientially seeing the results, taste and see for yourself through trial and error, and through putting it to the test, through this experiment. And I'm guessing, since you're here doing this podcast, maybe you tell me if you disagree, your experience has been like mine. The more I give over to my higher power, the better things go, and the easier things go. And there's a phrase, and I'll turn it over to you after I say this phrase, Catalina. It can pass like a kidney stone, or it can pass like a gentle breeze. And I find the same things can happen with my higher power's help, and it's more along the lines like a gentle breeze. When I'm trying to run the show and do everything my way, it's like that pain of a kidney stone. But yeah, Catalina, please talk to us and confirm or disagree, or, was that your experience in the 12-step program? You're experiencing this God caring for you through going through it, right? So you're not an idiot. If you turn things over and he did cause havoc and he did cause a lot of pain and things weren't improving, no one's going to keep doing that, right? There's a payoff that you're experiencing. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, something else to touch on, what you said is true. So yeah, through incremental, pieces of surrendering stuff and kind of seeing the results, I definitely felt more confident and more comfortable. And I mean, it felt like getting to know someone, it felt like getting to know someone that's been living in my house all this time and I didn't really know. And I'm getting to know them, and I'm learning to trust them, and I'm learning that it's a safe place and things like that. So that definitely happened. Something that was interesting, though, is that, something that really helped me that I did experience relief from with this step was learning, and I had started this through step 1 and step 2, and, so it came up in step 3, and also it's something I still continue to practice today, and through the other steps. But it's really this understanding and trying to get better and better at recognizing what is my responsibility and what is not my responsibility. What's in my control and what's not in my control. Back to, really myself, my actions, those are my control. But pretty much everybody else and everything else, I may have certain things like child that's in my responsibility, but I can't control what that child thinks. I can't control every single thing that child does. Like, I can't control that child's will. So even the things that are somewhat considered to be in my control or under my guidance are still not necessarily things that I 100% control. And so it was really helpful, because what I did start realizing is that a lot of times when things felt unbearable, like it felt like whatever was going on in my life that I was struggling from was so heavy I couldn't lift it myself, and I felt like I was getting crushed under the weight, was often when I was trying to lift things that were not my part to lift. I was taking on crosses and difficulties and responsibility for things that were not my responsibility. And so I was literally trying to lift that 800-pound boulder that my friend or my neighbor or my family member, it was their thing, but I was trying to lift it for them, and I just quite frankly didn't have the strength. And because it wasn't something that was meant for me. And so I realized that also, along with, with surrendering my stuff, is that with learning to not try to lift things that weren't mine, like, I'm not saying life was easy peasy. I still have crosses. I still had crosses or difficulties or whatever you want to call them, but I wasn't picking up extras and adding them to my list. Like, I was only, really focusing on what was given to me by my higher power, which I think a lot of times is, he gives to us because there's some good that comes out of it, versus us picking up extra crosses for ourselves. So I just thought that was really helpful, and there was relief in that, because I realized, like, wow, my life is not as complicated as I've made it. If I actually just stay on my side of the street and worry about my peace and not worry about controlling everybody else, life is actually a lot more bearable. Like, I can actually handle it. Something else that came up too is this concept of if we surrender over to God, like, some can fear that maybe God is going to deny us the things that we want or need. Like, God is going to deny us, like, our real needs, I guess, because maybe he thinks, like, those aren't really your needs or something. And that's not it at all. You're not necessarily trying to become this being that has absolutely zero needs, or if you have a need for something, that there's something wrong with it. Like, you have a need for companionship, or you have a need for whatever. But it's by surrendering it to your higher power, you're seeking, like, your higher power's ways to meet those emotional, physical needs. So you're not saying I want to deny all those needs by giving it over. You're basically just asking for guidance, because maybe you are searching for physical affection in ways that are not that healthy. Or maybe you're looking for emotional support or emotional companionship in ways that are not that healthy. Maybe you get into bad relationships or things like that. So it's asking God to come in and say, you gave me this need. I have it because you gave it to me. I can't control it and I can't meet it. So I'm asking for your help in how am I supposed to meet this? It's funny because it's like, if you've ever heard your body physically, they say a lot of times thirst can come across as hunger, especially for sweets, apparently. And so, which I love sweets. And so, it sometimes we think, like, we feel hungry and so we go eat, but what our body's actually trying to tell us is, I'm thirsty, I need water. But we feed it food, which is probably food we don't need to eat. And then on top of it, we're not giving it what it needs. And so it's basically coming back to the root to understand and get insights from your higher power on, oh, my body just needs water. So if I drink more water, actually the hunger goes away. The feeling of hunger goes away because my body's getting what it actually needs, which I've been mixing up as hunger for food. So I don't know, just something interesting.
No, I love that. And I was thinking of an analogy around dating, but I'm going to pause because I like how you brought up needs. So I'm going to quote the Big Book. and from 3 different books. And so we'll start with the big book, and we're going to keep going back to this. But on page 60 of the big book, it says, being convinced, we were at step 3, which is that we decided to turn our will and our life over to God as we understood him. Just what do we mean by that? And just what do we do? It says the first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. On that basis, we are almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives were good. In Al-Anon book, The Paths to Recovery, Al-Anon Step Traditions and Concepts, on page 28, it says, why would we choose to try this turning our will and our lives over to God? Because we do this because the way of life we created on self-will alone was neither satisfying nor serene. So our way wasn't working, and so we want to be open to trying something new. And my last quote, and this will touch on what Catalina was talking about with the needs, comes from a book called Serenity, A Companion for 12-Step Recovery, pages 34 and 35. Breaking out of this bondage of self, so doing it the old way, playing God, does not mean we ignore or deny our needs. In fact, quite the reverse is true. If we can discover healthy, God-directed ways to meet our emotional and physical needs, then we become less needy, less selfish, less self-preoccupied individuals. This is another recovery paradox. Discovering what our needs are and asking to have those needs met may be one of the most unselfish things we do. All of us have needs, and all of us have choices as to how those needs are to be met. Addictions, compulsions, and codependencies are counterfeit means of trying to meet our basic physical and emotional and spiritual hungers. With God's help, we can find genuine ways of satisfying them. So it's really beautiful to think about what you were saying, Catalina, and in light of these 3 quotes, that we're really meeting our needs. We're finally giving in to satisfying our deepest desires. And I know for me in my journey, I remember after one time, and I'm kind of jumping ahead, but I'll jump ahead a little bit because I think it ties on this topic. After doing a step 4, which was not my first step 4, and having a good experience, I remember my sponsor saying, hey, when are you going to start learning how to like yourself? Because I was constantly calling him up, talking about, how much I did wrong with this or that. And it's learning how to love myself, which brings me back to my dating analogy. Step 1 from a dating analogy is I'm alone. I have a desire to have a companion. I'm alone. Being alone is not working. That's my step 1. Step 2 is maybe I'm open to start dating. I believe there's a possibility to find companionship. I have that desire. I could believe that's true. Step 3, I make the decision to start dating. Just making that decision alone doesn't mean much. Even if I find an ideal companion and I go on that first date, it's just the first date. Now we have to have a relationship. And I think what's beautiful experientially about step 1, 2, and 3 is you're starting the process of I'm making room for a power to come in, and I'm going to have this relationship with this higher power, and I'm going to start the relationship just like I start any relationship if I dated someone for the first time. And that's going to build progressively as I get to know this higher power. We develop more and more intimacy, and it will grow and grow and grow. And that's powerful and not to be missed. Catalina, your thoughts on the dating analogy, the 3 quotes, or anything else you would like to discuss, so long as it is within the context of step 3.
Well, I actually really like when you just said a phrase you said making room for my higher power. And I just thought that is such a perfect description of step 3. Step 3 is literally realizing that I live in this house and I need help. And I'm making a decision to make room for my higher power to come in. And I'm inviting my higher power in. And not just once. Like, it's so cool because it's really like as if you had somebody in your life, like a relative or something that you've have decided now to start a relationship with. And you're not going to build a relationship by inviting them over once to your house in your lifetime. Like, inviting them over continually and doing, into different things and different activities and stuff. And so I just think that's such a cool visual of literally step 3 is you've agreed and decided that, you know what, I need my higher power in my life more, and I want to have a closer relationship with my higher power. And so I'm going to clean my house and make room so that there's enough space for him to come in, because, we can have our spiritual house filled to the point where there is no room for our higher power, and then invite my higher power, because our higher power is a gentleman or a gentlewoman, and they're not going to come in unannounced. They're not going to force their way into your life. She waits for you to open your door and invite them in. Even opening your door, you've got to be willing to allow them come in, him, her. And so I think it's just such a cool, I really, really like that. I've never thought about that before, but I thought that was really good.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful what you say. And even saying like a gentleman or a gentlewoman, if you date someone, and that person is a gentlewoman or a gentleman, they're going to also take the time to get to know you. They're not going to force themselves on you. The same thing in my experience with this higher power, very patient, and they don't force themselves. That my higher power doesn't force itself on me. He invites, he woos, he, waits, he kind of inspires. But he also, like a good parent, lets me grow and develop and make my own mistakes. So I believe, I'm not a parent, but I have a lot of nieces and nephews, and so does Catalina. And we watch those little beautiful kids fall down, do goofy things, and learn through their own trial and error. And we're there to support them, right? We're there to help them. We're there to encourage them, affirm them, and give them strength, which I think is really important.
Yeah, something else that popped up for me that I thought was really cool that I read in one of the 12-step literature is that step 3 is allowing someone to care for you. And I think that's profound for people who have a hard time letting someone care for them. What does that mean? There are people out there who they give and give and give. There might be the nicest people that you could possibly meet who would give you the shirt off their back, but will absolutely never let you give them anything in return. They won't let you, buy them a cup of coffee or, open a door for them. And I think that those of us out there, that it comes from a place of feeling unworthy to be loved. And I think that this step, you're actually doing some acknowledgement, whether it feels comfortable or not, that you are deserving of care. You are deserving that someone care for you and love you and take care of you and your affairs, because, some people, and I'm one of them, that I would never have described myself as somebody who didn't feel that. But if you looked at my actions objectively, I clearly liked being self-sufficient because I felt the most comfortable, because I didn't feel like people were going to be there for me. And part of that is because I didn't feel like I was worthy for them to be there for me. I think if you keep digging, it's kind of like the 5 whys or something. You keep digging deeper and why? And I think the root of it was because I didn't feel like I was worthy of love. And so this step is so cool because it really, not only underneath the decision of giving something to the care of someone else, but you're also letting someone care for you. And I just think that can be profound, and that actually can be part of the discomfort for people who maybe at the root feel that they are unlovable, that whether it's just who they are, maybe they've never felt lovable, or maybe you feel like you've done something horrible that just should, basically made you unworthy of love. We all have our reasoning behind why we feel the way that we feel, but it doesn't matter. And that's what the step is saying, and that's what the step is asking you to admit to yourself is, it doesn't matter what you've done, where you've been, where you've come from, what what your grown up has been, even where you are right now. Right now, this very second, it doesn't matter. You could be a pimp, with women that you're pimping out. And if you honestly said, accepted step 3, even there, you are lovable where you are. Now, that doesn't mean you can continue doing and choosing to do stuff, right? There's a change involved in that, because you're saying, I don't want to do whatever it is I'm doing anymore, or I don't know how to deal with what I'm doing anymore, and I need help. So you're imploring your higher power's care. But even in that, again, you're admitting, right, you're admitting and acknowledging that right now, exactly where you are, and with every wart and misstep in your past, that you are lovable and worthy of love.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. Very beautiful. In the big book, it talks about what Catalina was talking about, this insecurity. Bill Wilson had a way. You can read like list of shortcomings and big long list, but he kind of, even the 7 deadly sins he didn't use, right? And that's a list of 7. He kind of summed it up into a few different categories. Selfishness, self-seeking was a big one. Being frightened and being inconsiderate. And so this insecurity, this fear, these resentments, this frustrations, he kind of just lumps it into selfishness and self-centeredness. And the big book on page 62 says that we think is the root of our troubles. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity, we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. It says in another section on page 62, so our troubles, this is from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, so our troubles we think are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves, and the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. So there's that delusion, right? I'm running the show, but if you ask me, I wouldn't tell you I'm running the show. I'm playing God, but I don't know that I'm playing God. I'm delusional, and I'm in denial about that. Back to the book. Above everything, we must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us. And that's that step 1. It's killing us, and that's how we hit bottom. Because this life where we're playing God and trying to run the universe, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And yet we're wired for this, and it seems, and it doesn't work. So we need God's help. We must, or it kills us. God makes that possible. And there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of this self without his aid. Many of us had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we could not live up to them even though we would have liked to. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. We had to have God's help. And I had moral and philosophical convictions galore, Catalina. I had these real high standards that I wanted to live to, and yet I couldn't do it, or if I did, it was very short and it didn't last long. Something was very much out of whack. I had these spiritual things I was doing, saying, preaching, thinking, aspiring towards, but yet I couldn't let go. I couldn't experiment giving things up. I was too afraid. Too many defense mechanisms that I was not going to let go to. And that probably makes sense. I'm not going to let go unless I know there's another way, or until I hit so much pain from a bottom that I'm forced to give up, right, and put down those guns. I'm going to do another part of the big book. It says, this is the how and why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. Next, we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. He is the principal. We are his agents. He is the father, and we are his children. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was the keystone of the new triumphant arch through which we pass to freedom. And here's the promises of the step in the big book on page 63. When we sincerely took a position, and that's when we sincerely put trial and error into living step 3, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer. Being all powerful, he provided what we needed. Going back to what Catalina was talking about, we let this higher power care for us, and we discover he provides what we need, to our great surprise. And it says he provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. So if we put into action, the stuff, if we just kind of go along with the process, he takes care of us. I remember someone saying to me a line, and it might have come from Chuck C., but I could be mistaken, but it's this idea, we do his work and he takes care of us. And so it kind of simplifies life. We practice these principles, and he takes care of us. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. More and more we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life, as we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of his presence, we began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter. We were reborn. And then this gets to the step 3 prayer. But I love that as we felt the power, a new power. So step 1, we're saying we're powerless. Step 2, we're saying there is a power that's much bigger than me, a higher power that I need and that I want and that wants to be with me. And now I feel this, starting to feel this power. The more I surrender over in step 3, the more I experience that power working for me in my life. And it's a beautiful thing not to be missed.
Go ahead and go to the prayer.
Okay. We're now at step 3, still on page 63 of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Many of us said to our Maker as we understood him. And here's the step 3 prayer. God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. It says we thought very well before taking this step, making sure we were ready, that we could at last abandon ourselves utterly to him. And that's what they say in the big book, but I like what Catalina was saying, like no one does it perfectly. I would argue the deeper your bottom, the more you have the courage to do it perfectly at that point, because you've tried everything else. I think the higher the bottom, it's more piecemeal. That's just my theory.
At this point, since we're finishing up step 3, I think it's important to remind people that, at least steps 1 through 3, because that's what we're on now, are not static. They're not something you do in a moment in time and then never revisit. All 3 of them. There's something in the program called the 3-step shuffle. And it's basically, throughout areas in your life, new challenges appear and new, it's like life is like surfing, every moment, every wave is different. Every single time you're going to have to adjust to each wave individually. There's no perfect way that you can handle everything, like cookie cutter way. And I think every time you go through a new challenge where you're tempted to feel alone or try to control things that are beyond your control, or just act like you're an orphan and you don't have a higher power and do it all yourself and, control situations and try to make people do what you want them to do and whatever that looks like for you, it's back to the 3 steps. It's I can't, God can, and I'm going to make a decision. I made a decision to let him. And so it's okay to go back and forth. Like that's literally part of the process. But you go a little deeper each time. Each situation is a little bit different. You learn something different. I believe that every situation that pops up where you have to revisit each of these steps, there's some valuable lesson in them, which is why your higher power lets you experience that, because he wants you to learn something else. It's not static. It's not arbitrary. It's not like he just has things happen to you for no good reason and there's something wrong with you because you didn't learn this step perfectly. That's actually, I think, the way the program's designed. It's something that you incorporate into your life and something that you revisit every time you need to revisit it, which could be 50 times a day or twice a year. I mean, I haven't met anybody who only needs to do it twice a year, but I suppose it's possible. I'm probably more the 50 times a day person. But anyway.
Yeah, no, beautifully said. And I just want to talk about, we mentioned action and we mentioned the decision. And at the bottom of page 63 and continuing on page 64 of the Alcoholic Big Book, it says, next, we launched out on a course of vigorous action, the first step of which is a personal house cleaning, which many of us had never attempted. And that, for me, that's talking about step 4. But step 4, in my opinion, and we'll get to in our next episode, is really just looking at what are all the things that are preventing us from having a more beautiful life, more happiness, freedom, and joy. What's blocking out the sunlight of God's Spirit what's blocking out, to use Catalina's analogy of like this higher power who's in the house, but I don't get to know him. I'm not like, it's like this having this special genius live in our house, like Einstein or this great musician, and I've never let him play music before, but he's lived here. It's like, what's preventing me from having a relationship and getting to like enjoy the relationship with this power? Although this decision was vital and crucial step, it could have little permanent effect unless once followed by a strenuous effort to face and to be rid of the things in ourselves which had been blocking us. And there's that blockage again. So we had to get down with causes and conditions. So that's what step 4, we'll talk about it next time. It's really looking what's preventing us from living a happier life, what's getting in our own way, and what's blocking the sunlight of God's Spirit or God Himself from coming in and helping us more intimately so we can have a happier, more joyful, more peace-filled life. I want to just close with something from the 12 and 12 of Alcoholics Anonymous on page 40. So this quote says, like all the remaining steps, step 3 calls for affirmative action, for it is only by action that we can cut away the self-will, which has always blocked the entry of God, or, if you like, a higher power, into our lives. Faith, to be sure, is necessary, but faith alone can avail nothing. We can have faith, yet keep God out of our lives. Therefore, our problem now becomes just how and by what specific means should we be able to let Him in. Step 3 represents our first attempt to do this. In fact, the effectiveness of the whole AA program will rest upon how well and how earnestly we have tried to come to a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. You know, I like what Catalina was talking about. There's no way to really, like, if you have a little bit of willingness, go for it. And that little bit of willingness can turn into more because you'll experience good things. So taste and see for yourself through experience, through trial and error, the fruits of this, and take what you want and leave the rest. And interested to hear your thoughts on step 3. Until the next time when we tackle step 4, thanks so much for listening. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Serenity is Addictive. Until the next time we meet, keep trudging your road to happy destiny. Peace.